Good afternoon, guitarists of the YouTube, and welcome to this evening's video. So in this episode we're going to talk about a topic that I quite enjoy, something that I've used a lot and something I get asked a lot of questions about, and that is going to be scalloped fretboards. So this is something that I've been really interested in for a long old time really, and I'm going to talk about my experiences with this particular topic at the end of the video. A lot of the things that are true, a lot of things that aren't true, about the advantages and disadvantages that this modification to your instrument will provide you. So before we go on, let's start by defining what is a scalloped fretboard. So I'm very aware and very appreciative that some people might have no idea what I'm talking about at the moment, whereas others might find it a really interesting topic. So let's start from the basics of what it actually is. So scalloping the fretboard of a guitar is the process of removing the wood between the frets on the fretboard. So what you end up with was these series of U-shapes, as you'll be able to see on the clip I've inserted now, between the frets. To confuse things even more, this does happen in two different ways, which interestingly enough you can see on both of Fender's signature models that have scalloped fretboards on them, which is the Yngwie Malmsteen model, which is what I've got here, and also the Ritchie Blackmore model. Now the more simpler kind of scallop is featured on the Malmsteen model, which I've got right here. Now you'll see here we've got a nice normal U-shape between the frets, scallops evenly throughout the whole fretboard on the treble strings and the bass strings, going from the first fret all the way down. So on the Ritchie Blackmore model Strat, the scallops are very different, and he scalloped his Strat with the idea that one side of each fret can be played for rhythm and one side can be played for lead. So with this, on the higher side of the fret, we've got it scalloped out quite deep to provide us with some of the advantages that we'll talk about later, whereas on the latter side of the fret, we've actually got it almost flat like a normal neck, which will be used for playing rhythm. Very interesting indeed. Unfortunately, I've never played one of these guitars, even though I'd like to. They're not that common, certainly not in the UK, but very, very interesting guitars again. So there we touched briefly on a couple of the probably most well-known users of scalloped fretboards, both Yngwie Malmsteen and Ritchie Blackmore, but there are also a host of others that use scalloped fretboards, some of which you may not know about. So another common application of scalloped fretboards is to scallop only part of the neck, and this is commonly apparent on Steve Vai's guitars, where only the last 4 frets are scalloped. And this is because those frets are very, very narrow, and they're very small, especially if you've got bigger fingers, and by scalloping out the frets, it gives you a little more room to get your fingers so you can get under the strings and bend those high notes. Now another guitarist that you may not have heard of, who's one of the real pioneers of the scalloped fretboard, is John McLaughlin. So John McLaughlin is an incredible musician, amazing fusion guitar player, and he actually was one of the first guys to ever use a scalloped fretboard, and he actually had a Gibson ES345 that he had scalloped. So it's not just a thing for S-type guitars, which is obviously very common. So in today's era of guitar players, with the popularity of this modification, we obviously get a lot of our influence from those guitar players, so Malmsteen, Ritchie Blackmore, but back in the early days of them pioneering and using this type of guitar neck, where did they get their influence from? So it's been well documented that Malmsteen found his influence for scalloped fretboards when working as a luthier back in Sweden. One day at the shop he was working out, he had an old traditional lute came in, and this too had a scalloped fretboard. And from there he went on to try it on an old neck of his, really liked it and progressed from there, and obviously he is now one of the most regarded players that comes into conversation when regarding the scalloped fretboard. And this is similar to Ritchie Blackmore as well. He's obviously very, very influenced by folk music and continues to be heavily influenced and produce folk music today, and he was also influenced by these early traditional folk instruments. On a very different scale, John McLaughlin was heavily influenced by the instruments played by traditional Indian players, things like early sitars and similar instruments to that, where you actually press the strings into the neck of the instrument to bend. So now we know a little bit more about scalloped fretboards, about what they are, and some of the artists that have used them over the years. Let's try and uncover myth number 1 about scalloped fretboards. So myth number 1, this is such a common thing to see, is that scalloped fretboards are for metal guitar. Now it is really, really easy to see why people think that, because it is a very, very cult thing in a lot of the metal guitar followings. Taken on from a lot of the neoclassical metal that Malmsteen has obviously influenced, it is very, very popular in the metal scene. However, though it may be really, really common in the metal scene, it is most certainly not limited to that style of music. Both John McLaughlin and Ritchie Blackmore have pioneered it in loads and loads of different styles of music, from massive array of fusion, a lot of folk music, rock stuff with obviously Deep Purple, blues stuff as well. It really is something that's not limited to one style of music. So why do people choose to use these fretboards? They're not something that's particularly common. I can probably think of 2 or 3 other examples where I've gone to play with friends, or I've met people who have got guitars or play guitars that have these style of fretboards, so they're not the most common thing. So let's talk about the first advantage, which is going to also link with a disadvantage of scalloped fretboards. So the first advantage is that it requires you to play with a very light touch. Because there's no wood between the frets, it's very easy to push that string in to the fret and create a sharp note. Now this is the disadvantage of scalloped frets, and probably the biggest one that people experience when they try one for the first time and have a negative experience. Now if you're a heavy-handed player, especially in the fretting hand, and you play a scalloped fretboard, unless it's got very heavy strings on, it's going to be very likely that you're going to press those notes really hard into that fretboard and actually bend the notes sharp as if you were bending them up and down like on a traditional guitar neck. However, though this is a disadvantage, if you're able to overcome this, it forces you to play with a very light touch. And this leads me on to myth number 2 of scalloped fretboards. Probably top most common myth of scalloped fretboards is that having a scalloped fretboard will make you play faster. As we've just touched on, scalloped fretboards will force you to play with a very light touch, and this is advantageous for playing faster. Playing with a light touch means that you've got a lot more relaxed fretting hand, and it means that you have to put a lot less effort into fretting the notes. Now this is advantageous and beneficial for playing fast, as having a lot more relaxed fretting hand is going to help massively with playing faster styles of music. As well as this, you're going to get a lot less fatigue in the fretting hand, as it's not working as hard as it would normally on a normal flat fretboard. Now this does not mean that it will instantly make you play faster. You're not going to pick up a guitar and suddenly play really fast because you've got a guitar with this neck on. However, if you are playing fast styles of music, having the enforcement of the light touch will in the long run benefit your fast playing. So let's move on to advantage number 2 of scalloped fretboards, and one of the biggest ones. So having a scalloped fretboard provides you with huge advantages in the areas of bending and vibrato. So because the wood's been removed between the frets, when you fret a note, there is 0 drag between your string, the fret, and your fingers, due to the fact that the fingers do not touch the fretboard whatsoever. Now this means that you're in total control of the string, which not only benefits the playing with a light touch, but also provides huge advantages with bending and vibrato. I'd like to relay quickly again to myth number 1 about it stylistically being only for metal. Now bending and vibrato is a huge factor in all guitar playing, but especially blues and country. So blues and country are 2 styles that I personally feel translate really well to the use of scalloped fretboards. So let's talk a little bit about my experience with scalloped fretboards and about what I've found playing them for a number of years. So as many of you will know, I've been a huge Malmsteen fan for nearly 10 years now, and very quickly this became a topic that I was interested about. I'd always play Strats, but I didn't have the scalloped fretboard. As I'm sure many of you will be aware, it is very tricky to find a guitar with a full scalloped fretboard that you can try. So after a while of being curious about these fretboards, I actually bought a super cheap S-type guitar for the princely sum of £15. And with this, me and my good friend Dave took it to the technology department of our secondary school at the time, and we spent a number of lunchtimes and after schools scalloping it ourselves with a set of files and a few different grits of sandpaper. Anyway, it was a success. It wasn't the greatest guitar in the world, but it was really useful in getting the feel for the scalloped fretboard. We only did, I think, frets 21 to 12, but that was enough just to get the feel for it, see what it was all about. So I really liked it quite quickly, even though it was a very cheap guitar and it was sort of difficult to tell, the vibe was definitely there. And around 6 or 7 years ago, I got this. So this is an Yngwie Malmsteen series Fender. Like I said, I've had it probably nearly 7 years now, and it is absolutely my pride and joy. So this is the 2006 model, and as far as I'm aware, this has a slightly shallower scallop than some of the more current versions, the 2008, 2011, I think 2014 update versions. So I've had and played this guitar for a number of years. I've played it so much because I absolutely love it. So now let's talk about another common myth, myth number 3. Now myth number 3 is that it takes a long time to get used to the scalloped fretboard, and that once you start playing it, you can't play different sorts of normal fretboards. Now of course, guitar is a very personal thing, and this varies massively on person to person, and I'm talking solely from my experience here. So when I got the guitar with the scalloped fretboard, it took me around a week to get used to it with only one real problem. Now that one real problem was that I often used to slip off the neck on the high E string. But like I said, this lasted about a week, and after that I got used to it, and I've played this guitar for, again, around 6 or 7 years. Now in this time I've not just played this guitar, I've played lots and lots of other guitars. I have lots of other guitars, including my lovely Chapman guitars, a Les Paul, and the scalloped fretboard is certainly not a necessity. I like to play it, I really enjoy playing it, but it doesn't hinder my ability to play a normal flat guitar neck. I can go back and forth between any guitar, and it makes no real difference. So with that just about wraps up my knowledge of scalloped fretboards, and hopefully that answers the questions that a lot of you guys had asked me about the particular topic. Now, as I've already talked about and spoken about, it's a very, very personal thing, as all guitars are, so I'm really interested to hear your guys' experiences. So leave a comment below if you've got an interesting experience of the scalloped fretboard. It'd be really cool to know, cool to share a few ideas, and just get a different perspective on it. So with that, I'd like to thank you guys for watching. Leave a thumbs up if this was a useful video for you. Subscribe for a few more, and I'll see you guys next time.